Hello, welcome everyone. I know some people are still joining, but we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Ali DeYoung. I'm the project director with the Youth Employment Solutions Center, the YES Center. We are really excited to partner with the DC Partnerships and Employment State Project to bring you this webinar today. I've just posted the captioning link in the chat box, so if you'd like to access that, just click that link and we have closed captioning provided. At this time, I'm going to hand it over to Montrell. He's going to go ahead and introduce the PI project and our presenters for today. Thanks.
Hello, everyone. My name is Montrell, Tennessee, and I'm the project manager for the Partnerships and Employment grant here in DC. And in DC, we call it the DC Learners and Earners. And I'm very happy to be here with you today. So it's very important that we have this in DC because we have a very engaged group of caregivers, family members, and self-advocates. You can see that through our Supporting Families Community of Practice, our Family Support Council. And we look forward to seeing how we can partner and work together on the employment journey. So I'm really happy to have Dale and Sean here today. Dale Verstegen is our state liaison through the YES Center as part of the PI grant. So I'm going to turn it over to him to share a little bit more about what we'll be talking about today and next steps.
Great, thank you, Montrell, and welcome everybody to the webinar. As Montrell mentioned, I'm the state liaison to the DC project. There are 5 other states that have received funding to engage in the PI project, which stands for Partnerships in Employment. And it's all focused on systems change. These are 5-year grants, and we're going into our, we're in now our 4th year of these federal funds. As Montrell also mentioned, DC does have a robust connection to the family community, and they have Supporting Families Community of Practice. And so this webinar series is meant to kind of continue to foster that partnership, that coordination that we really think is important between families, individual job seekers, and youth interested in employment, and the professionals that are charged to work with them. We come to you for this webinar through the YES Center, which stands for the Youth Employment Solutions Center. And that is a partnership between the TASH Association and Transcend. And both Sean and I, who work on this project, are employees of Transcend, which is a almost 30-year-old national not-for-profit organization specifically devoted to the employment of people with disabilities. One of the key factors, particularly in the work that Sean and I and Ali do with our technical support, is the notion that employment programs, whether it's at the school transition level or whether it's at the adult level, really can be successful based on how well those programs are able to do when it comes to engaging families. They really can be a resource, and by engaging them, we really want to encourage that partnership, because then we think you have, particularly the job seeker, has support both at home and in the schools and through their adult provider. So that's what this series is all about. And I want to introduce Sean Roy, because he's one, particularly amongst us, who has really kind of led the charge and has had a whole career of expertise when it comes to engaging families. So with that, I'll turn it over to Sean.
Thank you, Dale. Thank you, Ali. Thank you, Montrell and Rebecca and DC2. As Dale mentioned, my name is Sean Roy, and I am also a state liaison with the Youth Employment Solutions Center. I focus primarily on Kentucky and Massachusetts. And as Dale mentioned, too, I do have a long professional expertise around the idea of family engagement. I used to work for a family advocacy center for many years, and I have a younger brother with a developmental disability. So I've got professional experience and life experience in I'm very passionate about the idea of family engagement and family empowerment, because I really do believe that families hold the key to employment success and transition success and life success. And that is not necessarily a disability conversation. That is just in general. If you think about your own family and the impact that they had in shaping your life and your worldview and your ethics and responsibilities, you know, it really is critical, and we need to kind of let families know that the same type of strategies are really applicable if you have a young one with a disability or not. And so very excited to be able to have this webinar series, and hopefully we can empower families and give out some good information. Our agenda for the day, if I can get my slide to turn here. Let's see here. There we go. The agenda for today, we're going to talk a little bit about really what is a good life. We want to structure this conversation around this idea of achieving a good life and the importance of setting a vision for the future. Maybe take a little bit of a look at expectations. The webinar series itself, because the Youth Employment Solutions Center is really focused on employment, is that the ultimate outcome is that we want to be able to better position families to support their young person in employment. So why is work important and how families can help? We'll talk a little bit about the concerns that some families may have when thinking about a real paid job in the community for their son or daughter. Now, the way that we're going to structure this is that Dale and I are going to have you for about the next 40 minutes. And we are going to periodically ask you some questions, which we hope that you'll respond to in the chat box. As well, we'd like you to, if any questions pop up in your head as we are talking, instead of taking questions real time, we're going to ask that those questions also be put in the chat box. We're going to reserve the last half of the session to answer questions that way. So we love your questions. We want your questions. Just type them in the chat box. And we'll get to them. So really, I see this agenda, I see this webinar series as trying to accomplish three things. One, we really want to raise family expectations around competitive employment. You know, that work is possible, and that was the title of the presentation today, right? Work is possible. We want to let you as families know that you are powerful, and that you are an essential part of this process, that you are not an innocent bystander here, you are a partner, and the level upon which you are able to partner and participate and contribute really is going to make a huge difference in how successful your son or daughter will be in employment. And we want to give you some very specific strategies and concepts, and we're going to do that in latter webinars about how do you do this. And this is some, we're going to give you some pretty upper level thinking on this, and we're very excited to be able to offer that. You know, I do parent presentations and have been doing parent presentations now for the better part of 20 years. And I really think it's important to start by addressing some of those families that may be hesitant, may not, you know, may have some questions about what their son or daughter, especially if they have a son or daughter with significant support needs, you know, what is possible? And I get asked that question every so often, Sean, what's possible? I don't know. I do know that great things are possible, but no one can really predict for sure what that would look like. But today, you know, in 2020, there are great opportunities for people with disabilities in employment, in being able to participate in recreation, and being able to advance after high school to post-secondary programs, and being able to explore interests and hobbies, and being able to have relationships, being able to own their own home and their own businesses, and to get married. We should not put limits on what your son or daughter might accomplish based on the disability that they have. We should take a look at supporting the goals that they have and allow them to participate in the greatest extent possible. And I love the set of pictures that was put together for us. It shows people in multiple scenarios, and that's what we really believe, that people with disabilities have all the opportunity in the world if they are well supported. One of the things that we do like to look at, though, when we talk to families is really looking at this idea of what does a good life look like for your son or daughter. And so I'm just going to assume that a lot of the people on the call and the webinar today are family members, or even if you're a professional, I'd like you to do this for me. In the chat box, I want you to answer me this question. What does a good life look like for your son or daughter, or what will it look like in 5 to 10 years? So imagine them as an adult in the community, in your community, however it may look. What does it look like in your mind? What would a good life look like? Where would they be working, or where would they be working? Where would they be living? What kind of relationships would they have? What kind of hobbies or exploration of their interests would they have? What kind of connection to their communities would they have? So in the chat box, just in there, and I'll ask Allie or Tia or Dale to just kind of let me know what we have. But again, what does a good life look like for your son or daughter? Thinking about them as we move on through to the future. And the reason we do this is because we feel it's very important for families to have a vision, but also to help their son or daughter have a vision for what life can look like. A vision beyond a life of isolation, a vision beyond a life of relying on eligibility-based services. And this is important because, as I mentioned, families really are the champion. Nobody knows your son or daughter better than you do. And therefore, having that vision, knowing what they're capable of, and envisioning that full extent is really important. And it's also important to allow and to support your son or daughter in having a voice in what that looks like. And we're going to give you a neat tool a little bit later to be able to do that. But this is not a family do everything for the youth conversation. This is a family supporting the youth to reach the dreams they set for themselves conversation. And that's why families are so important. On the business side of it, on the reality side of it, a lot of people, families, especially if they have son or daughters with intellectual developmental disabilities, may think that their only option is kind of a day full of eligibility-based services, either at a day center or in a group home or something like that. And really, formal services, as we have in quotes there, is not always a long-term option for people. Certainly it would be a lot to expect that your son or daughter is going to get a full day of services, and maybe and likely they don't need that. So how do we envision a future that might have the services necessary to support them in the community, but is not reliant on a whole menu of services that may or may not be needed?
Hey, Sean?
Yes.
I did get some responses. Venus says, employed, growing, learning, keeping busy with friends and family to be able to live independently as possible and have a safe work environment that is interesting to him. Jason said, living in my own home, being in a relationship. And Carol said, translating interests he already has shown by volunteering into paid work and greater independence. Great answers.
Absolutely great answers. And when we ask that question, Dale has done sessions with me many times before, and when we ask that question, we do tend to get those types of answers, right? We tend to get, we want them to be happy. We want them to be safe. We want them to be connected to their communities in a meaningful way. We want them to have friends and relationships. And employment always pops up, right? That's why this webinar series is so important, because we are going to talk to you over the course of the next 4 sessions about how you can make that happen.
Sean, one more came in from Catherine. Having work that is meaningful to her, living apart from us with support, and being engaged in a community activity.
Exactly. Yeah. And again, this is not about doing things on their own. We do acknowledge that people may require supports, and supports are okay. This is with or without supports, living the good life, the best life that they can. And that's a great place to start this conversation. This is a lot of times I find that families want to start conversations about the future based on the disability and the barriers. And so let's try a different way. Let's try starting from a more positive mindset. And that brings us to this discussion about expectations, because I really do think that one of the things that families, kind of do maybe without knowing is that they form expectations about what their son or daughter may be capable of. And they make decisions based on those expectations. And sometimes that works and sometimes that doesn't. So when we look at expectations, quite simply, expectations are a belief that someone will achieve something or something will happen or is likely happen in the future. And expectations are fueled by information, right? So we do have expectations that are very concrete, like, I believe that it's going to rain here in the next half hour because that's what the weather forecast told me. I certainly believe that winter will come and so will summer, so on and so forth. Really, it's a high expectations conversation. The high expectations are a belief that a person with a disability or another barrier or multiple barriers, right? So disability or homelessness or living in poverty can achieve the same life and have the same life choices as everyone else. And that's what we want to try to get at. And unfortunately, again, we do find that some families carry lower expectations, maybe sometimes through no fault of their own. So, a lot of times we need to ask ourselves, where are the low expectations coming from? And, in general, society still hasn't completely come around to the idea of people with disabilities being able to do a wide range of things. As a family, you may have experienced your own feelings about having a son or daughter with a disability. It may have changed your vision of what was possible. There may be some things that really you're dealing with that have impacted that and created a lot of questions. And certainly what we're told by others. I think about, for example, school meetings. If your son or daughter has an IEP, those IEP meetings aren't necessarily super positive, are they? You may not have a lot of positive messages about your son or daughter and what the future might look like. Really, the secret is to see that that people with disabilities, as we mentioned, are doing great things. And don't let other people's ideas impact your son or daughter's ability to make lives for themselves. You know your son or daughter better than anybody else. And it's so important to have high expectations, especially around employment. Because it's so easy to say, well, they have limitations and therefore I don't think they're going to be able to be employed. And the easy way out is a day program or something like that, or being at home. And that's not very fulfilling. Families set the bar for how the rest of the world see their son or daughter. If you say their son or daughter is capable and is going to achieve great things, that's going to drive how the rest of the world sees your son or daughter. So it's very important to have the high expectations. And a couple of ways to do that is to use positive language with your son or daughter. Let them know that they are people with skills. Let them know that you expect that employment is going to be part of their future. Use the same positive language with the schools and the service providers, right? So you're going to get negative messaging and you're going to be put in positions where you have to maybe dwell on some of the negative, but also make sure that the overall track is a positive one. Having high expectations really helps avoid a lack of confidence, both in families and in the young person. And it also helps to avoid kind of what we call restrictive programs, which are maybe disability-based programs that people don't necessarily have to be in or have to be in as long as they are. Expectations really impacts all of these things. As we said, this is an employment-based conversation today. So what I want to leave you with and hand over to Dale is another question in the chat box, if you would, please. Is employment currently part of your vision for your son or daughter's future? So when you think about your son or daughter and you you think about a good life. We had an answer from a couple of you. What is employment part of the future? And if so, tell us maybe what you think that might look like a little bit. So in the chat box, answer that question for me. What I'm going to do is hand it over to Dale to continue the presentation.
Thank you, Sean. So one of the core concepts is everyone can work. And at Transcend, one of the things that we've talked about before is the fact that everyone can work, and we believe that in terms of the way we train and the services that we deliver. There is a caveat there. Everyone can work if it's well matched to their interests, and if it is also something that the right supports are in place for. And that it's going to look differently for everybody. And that's what this webinar series is really going to be trying to get across, is how do we, and Sean talked about it earlier, is that this notion of high expectations is based on information. What information do you have? What information do you have to contribute? And even some of the things that I'm seeing going into the chat box, that is the kind of information that we're all looking for. And it should be rooted in what is unique and what is special about your specific and individual family member. And that's really what we want to say, is that, yes, when it comes to job postings and when it comes to what we call competitive employment, it may not always be a good match. And the sorts of contributions and abilities of individual folks that are interested in employment may not always match up to those job descriptions as posted. But when it comes to working with a team, and when it comes to getting the right information, it can lead us to opportunities that otherwise may not be available on behalf of that specific family member. So what you can see here is this idea of a path. And that's what we think is really important, is that you get a sense or a model or a framework for what it is that is possible in terms of a path for your family member. And we think by using this notion of a process, it puts you in a position as a family member to communicate and in some cases actually partner with others at the school level, at the provider level, in terms of being engaged in each one of these steps, building skills, exploring careers, setting that vision, identifying the critical support needs, creating that notion of meaningful work experiences that ultimately get us to this common goal around employment. That could be with and without supports. So this process is something that we will be training to when it comes to this entire webinar series. And so why should they work? Well, for the same reasons for all of us. And we really don't see it as any different. That notion of expectations. I know that I spent my entire life being asked when I was growing up, what do you want to be? And of course, my answers changed at different ages. But within my family, that expectation was driven into me just based on being asked that question. And even just keeping track of the different kinds of answers that I provided at different points during my education. And that notion of socialization, it really does help to engage folks. I know that in my particular case, I derive almost all of my socialization and friendships from those that I've had the opportunity to work with. And so, my work defines me, and it defines my social life as well. And that notion that I am able to participate and contribute. And I think the same thing applies to your family members. And that is probably the most rewarding, I think, for ourselves at Transcend, But for any of the employment and transition professionals that we've had the opportunity to work with, it's seeing that pride, seeing that dignity that comes with the fact that people work, wearing the same uniform or clothes of coworkers, and engaging in common activities and having that sense of purpose. Money shouldn't be ignored. That's an important element of this. Promotes mental health. And again, you know, if you bought into the last slide and the one before that that said, you know, there's a job for everybody, then you also would be buying into the concept that they can. And that's really what we want to leave you with, particularly with this opening webinar, is that feeling and that sense of hope that comes with my family member can work. We just got to find the right place with the right supports.
You have some answers on.
Oh, great, Tia. What's come up?
Carol says translating interest. He has already shown his by volunteering into paid work and greater independence.
Great.
Catherine says having work that is meaningful to her, living apart from us with support, being engaged in the community activity. Venus says, yes, I envision a job in manufacturing or warehouse for my son. Catherine says, yes, lucky to be employed now, working in food prep in the kitchen of a retirement center. And Kevin says, definitely yes.
Great. Good affirmation by Kevin, who does play an important role in helping with our youth employment efforts in DC. Yes, I loved all those answers. And what I guess I'd like to say before I turn it back over to Sean is this whole webinar series is going to take those answers that you just gave us now. And so we'd love for you to kind of keep those responses in mind as we move on, and ideally have the opportunity to continue to work with us and participate in the upcoming webinars. Because what we're going to now do, and Sean alluded to it earlier, is it's the information that really creates that high expectation. So we're going to want to drill down in terms of some of these answers. What was the volunteering all about? What aspects of that volunteering did they find to be the most rewarding, and where they made the best contributions? And when it comes to the food prep, what aspects of that? Do they like the socialization? Do they like the and so we want to get down to specific tasks, specific positive personality traits that really helps inform what's possible for each and every family member. And if they're already working, we have to look at this as a career track. And so what might be next? And if they haven't had that first job, that's what we really want to shape our those meaningful work experiences around, so that they can get on to a career path. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sean to talk about how families can support employment.
Thank you, Dale. You know, as we mentioned earlier, families, they play a crucial role. You guys play a crucial role in supporting employment. And over the years, I've come to find that families want to be a partner, just sometimes they don't know how. And so this is just some ideas, and we're going to again touch on a little bit later in the series. The series was designed to be, the sessions to be a little bit shorter, to give you kind of digestible pieces and more of them. And so if it feels like the time goes by, it's just because Dale is such a gifted speaker. So we have fun. We're having fun all the time. So, you know, I'm not going to go over a lot of these things. We're going to talk about skills in the next, third webinar. But, you know, what we want to stress is that you'll see that other than setting the expectation, the whole middle part is about skills. And employment is not about finding somebody who will hire your son or daughter. I hear that all the time. Do you have a list of employers who will hire my son or daughter because they have a disability? That's not the way to look at it. The way to look at it is, how do we find interests? How do we take natural skills that everybody has? And how do we build the skills that might be needed for somebody to be able to function in the workplace of their choosing? So that might be soft skills, which are the interpersonal skills, the dressing appropriately, showering every day, taking directions, but it also may be hard skills. It might be using technology. It might be getting from point A to point B. There might be some healthcare management skills that need to come into play if somebody has some health management issues that are going to need to take place on the job. Chores in the home is something that we always advocate for. And I do find families sometimes are resistant to give their child with a disability chores or to push them into new chores and new responsibilities. But in the home is the best environment to be able to teach these skills because it's free. And it's you can teach baking and cooking skills. You can teach cleaning skills and responsibility and waking up on time. All of these great things that you can teach in the home. But also families play this role in really being a partner with the school and employment services. You're not a passive player in this. You are really, the information that you hold about your son or daughter is probably the keys to the kingdom. Now, that's the things that the schools and the employment services need the most to be able to do what needs to be done to set up work experiences and provide the supports to your son or daughter. So let's, I do want to switch gears just a little bit though and acknowledge that having a child with a disability does come with it some questions and concerns. And when we're talking specifically about a real job in the community, we're talking about their own job in the community with or without supports at real wages, right? And there may be some current concerns that you have about that, and that's okay. And I would ask you again in the chat box, if you're willing, to put the concerns that you might have when thinking about a real job for your son or daughter. What makes you worried or concerned? And we don't do this to be manipulative. We do this because it helps us learn, but also we firmly believe that when you tell people what you're worried about, you're also telling people what you need, what support you need, and what support you believe your son or daughter needs. It may be, for example, vulnerability. Very simple. If you've got a person with a developmental or intellectual disability, maybe they don't make the best choices. Maybe stranger danger is a very big concern. I find this a lot for parents who have young females who have some intellectual barriers. It's very real. Vulnerability, safety. Will they be safe on the job? Can they actually do the job? And these are possible concerns. I'm not posing questions. I'm saying that families may have questions about whether or not their son or daughter is capable of working in a competitive environment. They have questions, tend to have questions about who's going to hire them, right? And again, this is based on old information. This is based on old paradigms of what people do with disabilities and what people with disabilities do. And will they lose their benefits? Because we know that the benefits planning is a huge part of this concern, right? We absolutely get that. So in the chat box, let me know what concerns you might have about that.
While Carol listed, even before you asked that, my son already shows job skills, but is reluctant to go through the process of applying, interviewing, such as getting the job part. Jason shared safety and vulnerability to strangers. Catherine just shared employers not willing to learn about disability, being picked on by coworkers.
Right. And I'm here to say that it is 100% okay and expected and natural for you as families to have those concerns. You should not feel like you don't have a right to have those concerns, because those are real. Those are very real concerns. What I would say is that we need to find a way to be able to address those concerns in a way that allows the young person to take some risks and try the job, but also in a way that allows the family some peace of mind that their concerns are being addressed. And that really is, again, we want to say those concerns are very valid. Also, a couple of pieces that I tend to talk to families about, and it might feel a little bit squishy, but hopefully you can relate to it. We realize that we're asking you to have high expectations about what your son or daughter is going to achieve. Yet also we know that a lot of the supports for people with disabilities are based on the severity of their disability. My guess is that oftentimes you're asked to kind of describe your son or daughter on their worst day, because that is what's going to keep some of the services going. And I just wanted to acknowledge that, yes, that is a balancing act. And unfortunately, our services are currently structured in a deficit-based format. Hopefully that can change someday, but just I know high expectations are sometimes hard to manage. Also, we live in a world of kind of predetermined milestones, don't we? That, you're going to, my son just turned 18 on Sunday and graduated from high school in this weird 2020 year. That is a predetermined milestone. He is now going to go off and make his way at the college of his choosing, and then he might get a job, and then he might get a different job, and then he might meet a young lady, and then he, right? These are all milestones that we have kind of created in our society. They're artificial. And sometimes families of kids with disabilities, they feel bad because their son or daughters aren't reaching the same milestones at the same rate as other people do, and that's okay. It is okay. Sometimes people need a longer runway to launch into this world. So if your son or daughter's first job comes, when they're 20, that's fine. If it comes when they're 22, that's fine. If they don't leave the house until they're 30, that's fine, right? So don't measure yourself against milestones that are artificial. Measure your son or daughter's progress based on what they are capable of, and celebrate every single time they make a movement and they grow, because that's the only runway that you need to worry about. So Dale, this was listed as yours. Do you want this one, or you're on mute?
Because one of the things that Carol brought up, and I just want to address as it relates to that longer runway. She says biggest concern is actually is about motivating them to do the work necessary to go after that competitive employment. And I think that concept of the long runway really applies there, because what what I think has to happen is that he finds this opportunity to make a contribution, and we can build it into smaller milestones, which can be as small as just a situational assessment, a community-based assessment, unpaid work experiences, ways to kind of quote unquote graduate him on this runway of smaller steps to where he finds that type of work, and more importantly, the right environment for where he is motivating. And it may not just be the tasks that he needs to be motivated. It might also need to be the right environment where he enjoys coming into work, and it's a socialization. So we have to find the right spot. It sometimes takes a much longer runway. What is success? Again, that is possibly measurable. And so I guess you could look at it both quantitatively and qualitatively. And a number of you had specific qualitative factors that you have as to what success might look like for your family member. And so this notion of hours worked, tasks able to be done, how flexible or inflexible are they when it comes to environments or tasks? What is their tolerance? And then Sean referenced it already. It's that recognition and celebration of progress. And that's where that slide that Sean was going through earlier about trying tasks at home, giving them chores. It's really that smaller baby steps on this runway that really gives us some of that key information that we can puzzle together to kind of find the right place. And that's why there isn't a list of employers that are out there that's the ideal place for your family member to work. It really has to be something that we start with the person and then look out to see what's available. So we'll talk again more about some of those factors later. And then here's some of the myths. And I know as family members, you've been probably struggling with some of these in terms of misinformation and misunderstanding. And I think one of them came across with one of the concerns that one of the family members had, which is, and I think it was put into terms of educating. We need to educate those employers as it relates. And I would use a slightly different word than educate. I would use support. I think what those employers need is a support to really understand the contributions that and what is possible, depending on the specific person that might be recommended when it comes to working at an employer site. But I think the person who said that was really thinking about some of these myths, or unfortunately, with some employers, it's perceived as fact. You know, people with disabilities don't work as fast as others. They may not be, not that that is necessarily wrong, but it isn't always the case. In fact, it is a myth if you wanted to make it a universal concept, because it's not true that coworkers won't accept people with disabilities, and that if they stay sheltered, they stay safer. Especially in light of what we're all dealing with right now, congregated, segregated services is not looking to be safer. And people who leave workshops lose their friends. It can happen when people go from more congregate types of activities and work to more individualized. That does put them in a position that it's different for them. But there's ways that we can really ensure the engagement of those friends that they've already have, and still work effectively out in the community. And of course, if you have a more significant disability, don't need to work. And I think that's really kind of driven by our whole benefits system, Social Security, and other eligibility criteria that exist. And so, you know, if they're significant enough, then we can take work off the table. Can you? Yes, you can. Do you need to? No. And I think that's why that is, in fact, a myth as well. So when it comes to Social Security, and I already referenced that, getting students on SSI will take care of everything. There is the age 18 redetermination, and that can be real startling and eye-opening, especially if the family member does not maintain those benefits after the age of 18. People who choose to work will lose disability and healthcare benefits. They are affected when somebody works, but I think the key to all of these issues and myths around working in Social Security is that these resources, these benefits need to be managed. And that's, I think, the main message to families is, yes, you need to understand them to some degree, but more importantly, you got to find out though who are the experts, who are those certified work incentive counselors, and they do exist in DC and in other places around the country. And you need to find access to what it says here, WIPAs and CWECs. And through your VR agency, you can also, if you don't know where to find such a counselor on benefits, they can help you. But you need to access those if you want to seriously consider work. And the best time to access who might be able to help you is before work is actually starting. Because then you can become familiar with the concepts. And then when the person's going to start work, you know what to do. You know how to, to report those earnings, and know that you, in fact, if you manage those benefits and work, you stand a chance of moving out of poverty. Because if you just stay on Social Security benefits, those are at the poverty levels in terms of level of income that person would have if work isn't going to be considered for that person. So working is the answer to having more income over time, but requires managing those Social Security benefits as well.
We have one that says from Kevin. It says, my concerns are whether their coworkers or supervisors might value them. I know from experience that people with disabilities show their love to work while also talking with people at work. Some people have different talents and skills, but I'm just worried that some workers might not take time to see what people with disabilities can offer towards the job.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. That's an excellent point, particularly those supports in the workplace. And providing supports to people in the workplace is as much about art as it is about function. And it really, you know, and I don't think that's unique to having a disability. I know that I'm always amazingly nervous coming into a new work environment. And I may be seen as shy or a little bit removed. And I think that applies to the folks that we place. It applies to the folks that have to work with somebody new. So I think the how we provide those supports and the way we help that person try to fit into the workplace is an important element as well. But Kevin, a really valid concern and one that really does need to be addressed. And in all of these situations as family members, and Sean really encouraged it. It was to say, your concerns are valid. All of these issues that you have are and should be the basis of your conversations with your team. And we're going to be talking about that, how you can address some of these issues and concerns through the kind of information that we're going to encourage you to gather on behalf of that family member during this webinar series. But also we want to provide some support and some coaching to how to kind of maximize that partnership with the other sources and partners that we encourage you to work with to when you have this common goal around employment for your family member. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Sean to kind of go through our takeaways.
All right, we've come to the end, everybody. So just kind of to summarize what we talked about, you know, everyone can work, and hopefully that's something that you will take away. If kind of the one thing is that work is possible for everybody, and you know, setting a vision and having high expectations that competitive employment is possible is important, and families really are the ones to kind of convey that vision and help their son or daughters kind of realize it and set it for themselves. Work is important. It's not necessarily a luxury. It's really part of a good life. It's part of a fulfilled life. It's what people do, and families can help their son or daughter reach that goal. But it is, Dale just mentioned, questions and concerns are normal. It is absolutely normal to have those, and those should be the basis for the supports conversations that you have with schools and with service providers. And not making bad decisions based on inaccurate information really is speaking directly to the benefits conversation. If your son or daughter is on Social Security benefits, there's maybe a lot of misinformation floating around out there. So get the right information before you make any decisions about the role that employment's going to play. And really, we hope that you join us for the whole series. The whole series is, we're doing one. Now, this has not been updated. We moved it back a week, and so everything is the next one obviously is webinar 2, which is going to be June 16, exploring career options. You know, where do they want to work? We're going to really take you through the process of exploring these options. Webinar 3 is going to be preparing to work. We're going to focus on matching skills, identifying skills to specific jobs, and that's going to be June 23rd. And then on June 30th, it's going to be, we're going to talk a little bit more about finding the right employment opportunity in the community. So what is the role of families to be able to help support that process? Because we really want work experiences and in the community and jobs in the community. So we hope that you join us. So now it's time for questions. We have left ourselves about 10 minutes. It's absolutely perfect. And so any questions about the content that we have presented today, any questions in general that you came in with about employment, about services, we've got Dale and I, we've got Montrell and Rebecca and Tia, we've got a bunch of experts sitting here that I think that could help contribute to this. So in the chat box, if you would, go ahead and share your questions and we'll do our best on them.